To quote Mr. Woolridge, good morning, everybody. Good morning. What a glorious, splendid day. What a glorious, splendid occasion. I'm very honored to be talking to you on this occasion. And let me say, not just to the class of 16, but to your families, your friends, your teachers, class of 2016, from my heart, congratulations. I have asked young people about doing this kind of commencement speaking, and the advice I've gotten is, don't talk about hope, and don't tell anybody they're the future. So I will talk to you about the past and despair, and maybe a bit about death. You are the past. This is the beginning of your becoming the past. And as to death, I'll try to say why I think avoiding the cliche of hope for the future enhances the splendor and the glory of what you are doing. There's a thought experiment. The thought experiment is, imagine that when you die, the rest of the world will live only for a few hours or days. After you die, there will be no future. Most people who think about that discover that it would be very upsetting. More than we think, the decisions we make, the way we spend our days, the things we do, depend on the idea of something after us, of posterity. Some people listening may think, well, not me, I'm a hedonist, I just live for my own pleasure. When you live for your own pleasure, whether it's food, pornography, buying fancy equipment of some kind, playing sports, sooner or later, if you have any brain at all, you will start to distinguish between artistic, excellent pornography and journeyman, inefficient one. You might even become a collector. Same with food, with wine, with sports, with anything. It is human nature. It is embedded in us to learn and create things and to become the past for somebody else. When you die, if you have one of the best collections in the world of wine or sports memorabilia or pornography or of recipes going back to the 17th century, you will want it to go to someone who appreciates it. And your privilege and mine has been to go to a land-grant university. I will now talk to you about the past. You may not know that the Morrill Act, proposed by Senator Justin Morrill, from which I benefited when I went to my state university, and for which you benefit, the United States Congress voted repeatedly not to give you that privilege. Senator Morrill presented the Morrill Act, and it was defeated. And it was defeated again. And do you know how it passed? And I'll quote from the Morrill Act. It was not to exclude scientific and classical studies. It was to promote liberal and practical education of, quote, the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions of life, accessible to all, but especially, pardon the sexism, to the sons of toil, to people who worked. One of the best teachers I had at my state university, Paul Fussell, said the Army taught him a lot for the first time he met people who worked for a living, as many of us here and our families have done. And do you know how the Morrill Act passed? It passed because of the secession. The southern states that seceded, and in which today there are questions about the Voting Rights Act, after they seceded, then the act was passed and it was signed to your benefit and mine by President Abraham Lincoln. I'll quote a few other things to you involving the past. Many of you probably know that after the Civil War, there was a debate. Some well-meaning people said, these former slaves, people who a generation or a few generations before had been torn out of their culture, many died in the passage, some carved into the ship's timbers names that they would never be called by again. We should have the first generation learn to be cooks and carpenters. Then there can be a generation that will be clerks and artisans and mechanics. Then a third generation, we might have some school teachers. And by 5 or 6 generations, we can educate some of these people to be scholars and lawyers and doctors and scholars. W.E.B. Du Bois, the great American essayist, said, no. In his essay on the subject of education, he said, teach laborers to labor, teach clerks to be clerks, teach scholars to be scholars, teach lawyers to be lawyers. It depends upon each person's gifts. He even has the wonderful line, and teach fools to be fops. And at the end, in the last paragraph of that great essay on education, he says something that inspired me when I was about your age. I'll read the last paragraph of his essay. The first sentence, as happens with very good prose writers of the period, it's actually a line of blank verse. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. You have the privilege that you have been given of whatever you think is best, whatever your teachers think is best, and we got it from the past. I did not invent poetry. Mr. Woolridge did not invent finance. Chancellor Helms did not invent ancient history. We got these things from people who are mostly now dead. And after we're dead, you will be the past. And it will be up to you to see to it that in the ideal, yet to be realized, of a democratic culture in our country, a great American enterprise we're still working on to become a people with a culture, it will be you are now the past. I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not, he says. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls. He says gilded halls to invoke social class. You are part of a splendid and glorious institution, thanks to Senator Morrill and Abraham Lincoln. When that act was passed, Princeton University, the traditional university of the South, had never admitted an African American student. That was true of Princeton University when I was in college, right into the 1960s. So you can be proud that you are at the top of the process of America's aspirations to be a democratic culture. I'm sure that at the predecessor institution, some of you may have heard of the New Bedford Textile Academy. I'm sure they were influenced by the Marxist artist and designer William Morris, who had the ideal that nobody should ever work on producing things that don't give pleasure to the maker. So that even if it's glass beads, somebody should take pride in making them. So he is invoking, Du Bois is invoking social class when he says, from out the caves of evening that swing between the strong-limbed earth and the tracery of the stars, I summon Aristotle and Aurelius, and what soul I will, and they come all graciously, with no scorn nor condescension. So, wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America? That is K-N-I-G-H-T-L-Y, knightly America. Is this the life you long to change into the dull, red hideousness of Georgia? Are you so afraid lest peering between this high Pisgah, are you so afraid lest peering from this high Pisgah between Philistine and Amalekite, we sight the promised land? You are there. It is your responsibility. If you win a Nobel Prize, if you start a business that makes billions of dollars, if you discover wonderful cancer therapies, you still are somewhat of a failure unless you try to pass it on to another generation of Americans, regardless of privilege, of family fortune, completely according to talent. That's what you are charged with. You are the past. We are the past of the past. Whatever you do, keep in your mind that you are responsible for something that I got from people who are no longer here. And when we are gone, that's going to be your job. You can call it the future if you like. It's equally appropriate to call it the past. Now I'll take up the past in another quotation in a more personal way. Yes, I'm going to read a poem to you, not by me, by William Carlos Williams. Not understanding things is a very important part of life. If you come from a family like mine with lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, the old people start talking about the family history, and it's never neat. It's always, well, after they separated, he abandoned that family, and they lived with the Bragers for a while, but then when the Bragers ran out of money, the other divorce made, and you're going, what, which, where? Well, that was after Grandpa moved from Puerto Rico to New York. But I thought he was in Cuba. Oh, that was before, and you're getting him mixed up with your other grandpa. That confusion, that disorderliness of the family story, I think it's a very common American experience, that the past is not neat, it's not orderly, it involves a lot of distress and multiple partners and abandonments and triumph. Williams, in this poem called Dedication for a Plot of Ground, to me, he gives a very characteristic American hero story. It's impossible to follow the details. And I think he deliberately makes it hard to understand because it evokes that experience of American families, epic and heroic and comical and messy experience. Dedication for a plot of ground. This plot of ground, facing the waters of this inlet, is dedicated to the living presence of Emily Dickinson Wellcome. She was born in England, married, lost her husband, and with her 5-year-old son, she sailed for New York in a two-master, was driven to the Azores, ran adrift on Fire Island Shoal, met her second husband in a Brooklyn boarding house, went with him to Puerto Rico, bore 3 more children, lost her second husband, lived hard for 8 years in St. Thomas, Puerto Rico, San Domingo, followed the eldest son to New York, lost her daughter, lost her baby, seized the 2 boys of the oldest son by the second marriage, mothered them, fought for them against the other grandmother and the aunts, brought them here summer after summer, defended herself here against thieves, storms, sun, fire, against flies, against girls that came smelling about, against neighbors, weasels that stole her chickens, against the weakness of her own hands, against the growing strength of the boys, against wind, against the stones, against trespassers, against rents, against her own mind. She grubbed this earth with her own hands. She domineered her oldest son and blackguarded him into buying it. She lived here 15 years, attained a final loneliness, and if you can bring nothing to this place but your carcass, keep out. I love that he ends that poem with a very American phrase, keep out. If you can't bring anything else here. I suppose that's my job, to talk to you and to say to you, if it's only your carcass, keep out. You don't belong here. I'll give you another test. I told you I was going to talk to you about despair. This is a great poem, in my opinion, written by a great artist, known mainly not as a poet. He was a quite serious poet. Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He wasn't just a painter and a sculptor. He also wrote poems. He's a wonderful poet. And this is the American poet Gail Mazur's translation of Michelangelo's poem about painting, but a lot of people, probably more tourists, see it than any other work of art in the world. It embraces probably more different kinds of story and culture in one place than any visual work of art in the world. And here's what Michelangelo, in his poem, has to say about painting the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo, to Giovanni da Pistoia, when the author was painting the vault of the Sistine Chapel, 1509, translated Gail Mazur. I've already grown a goiter from this torture, hunched up here like a cat in Lombardy or anywhere else where the stagnant water is poison. My stomach's squashed under my chin, my beard's pointing at heaven, my brain's crushed in a casket, my breast twists like a harpy's, my brush above me all the time dribbles paint so my face makes a fine floor for droppings. My haunches are grinding into my guts. My poor ass strains to work as a counterweight. Every gesture I make is blind and aimless. My skin hangs loose below me. My spine's all knotted from folding over itself. I'm bent as taut as a Syrian bow. Because I'm stuck like this, my thoughts are crazy, perfidious tripe. Anybody shoots badly through a crooked blowpipe. My painting is dead. Defend it for me, Giovanni. Protect my honor. I am not in the right place. I am not a painter. The greatest artist in history says at the end of his poem, I am not a painter. I mean, he was a sculptor as well. But if there's anybody here who has never felt like that, to quote William Carlos Williams, keep out. Part of the process of trying to do anything. Again, it's in the nature of the animal. Part of the process is we get these pursuits that drive us a little crazy. It's why we like doing them. It's why people love video games, because they're hard. It's why if people make a lot of money in our country, you often find them out with a stupid little white ball and a stick hitting it around in the grass, because it's infinitely hard. And I'm wishing for you that you find something hard and demanding that's at least worth being compared to what Michelangelo is talking about. I'm going to close with one more poem. Tonight, as I fall asleep, I'm going to be asking myself, did they applaud for the word poem or for the word close? I think I know the answer, but I'll assume that it's both. This poem is by the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, who saw many people in his generation killed by Nazis, who had to change countries. He thought he would never be honored in his own country of Poland. It was forbidden to use his name for many years. And then he did win a Nobel Prize. And he was my friend, and I worked with him on this translation into English of his poem, Incantation. I will remind you that incantation, it's not the world as Czesław thinks it is. It's the world as he hopes we someday bring it into being. I will say one single word to you after I've read the poem. Incantation. Human reason is beautiful and invincible. No bars, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes the universal ideas in language and guides our hand, so we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. It puts what should be above things as they are. It is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It does not know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage. It saves austere and transparent phrases from the filthy discord of tortured words. It says that everything is new under the sun, opens the congealed fist of the past. Beautiful and very young are philosophia and poetry, her ally in the service of the good. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their friendship will be glorious. Their time has no limit. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. Congratulations.